And I was like, that's it. Like manual conversation design's done. All of our revenue, all of our customers. Well, yeah, it doesn't go away overnight. Like I always joke to our team, the fax machine is still a multi-billion-dollar market. That it's clear that the technology is cresting, right? Like traditional NLU intent-driven agents are going to move away, and it's going to move into like agentic frameworks and things like that.
Hi, my name is Dimitri Benici, and I'm a content creator, agency owner, and AI enthusiast. You're listening to the AI Agents Podcast, brought to you by Jotform, and featuring our very own CEO and founder, Ida Tank. This is the show where artificial intelligence meets innovation, productivity, and the tools shaping the future of work. Enjoy the show. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the AI Agents Podcast. In this episode, we have the founder of Voiceflow, Braden Ream. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
I'm living the dream, and seems like people who want to have the complete chat and voice AI platform are as well when they use Voiceflow. Yeah, so it was corny, but yeah.
It's funny. I feel like every founder hates their website in H1, myself included. But, some things you got to do for SEO.
Absolutely. And just to give everyone more of an insight outside of the tagline, tell us a little bit about your background and first of all, how you get into AI, and secondarily, how Voiceflow got started and a little bit of the story there.
Sure. So Voiceflow is my second company. I had a company in college for 3 or 4 years that I was sort of running. And at the end of that was like a social networking thing, kind of like first product, first company, first time building a team, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And at the end of college, Alexa had just launched, and at least it launched in Canada, had been around for a couple of years.
Sure.
And that's where I was living at the time. And I started playing around with the SDK, like building like Alexa apps and Alexa skills. And I was like, wow, this is like really cool. Like it feels like, it was still pretty rough at the time. But I think it was like clear that assistants and, what was then called assistants, now called agents, was really going to be the way that brands interacted with customers in the future. But, through voice, through chat, through any modality, like really sort of being an operating system between a brand and a customer. And so, yeah, like as I was building these apps, like I kind of started to develop that thesis, and my co-founders had also started other companies. We all kind of knew each other from like that. And it just kind of hit that like, wow, like all the tools out there to actually build these things are really bad. Like,
yeah,
they're not friendly to use. Those that are friendly to use are not powerful, and those that are powerful and not friendly to use. And we're like, where's like the Figma quality product for this space? Like, where is the something that's collaborative, allows my team to work together and build a great agent? Because I think, at that time, people really viewed agents as like chatbots in the bottom right corner, or like a call center automation that you hate. And like, it was like a necessary evil. They weren't really viewed as like products yet. And so I think we were, I don't want to be too grandiose about it, but we were probably one of the first companies that like we raised money to build like an agent as a product. Like the whole product was an agent. It was an Alexa app. And we raised like $500,000 to go build this, like, probably one of the very few venture backed like Alexa skills. And as we were building that, we just found that the tooling layer was super rough, and we ended up building Voiceflow as an internal tool through like 2019. And then 2020, we had a bunch of folks ask, like, can they start using our tool? And that's kind of like the light bulb moment of, oh, yeah, you know what? Like, our app was called Storyflow. Like, why don't we make like our internal tool, which was called Voiceflow, the whole company? And yeah, it's been a crazy journey since then. Hundreds of thousands of developers on the platform, over 4,000 customers, some huge Fortune 500s, 100s, small startups, kind of all over the gamut.
Very cool. And when making the transition into, this new venture and everything like that, it feels like there's been a lot of improvement over the last year or so, especially on the voice side. And, I know when we talked previously that, your name is Voiceflow, and maybe it's kind of interesting how the nature of your approach towards what's the main focus of your service offering is, and how like voice has kind of gotten better really recently. But you state again, you were founded a couple of years ago, so kind of maybe before.
Yeah, before LLMs, like
before LLMs,
2 years before LLMs, or 2 or 3, and we like basically back then, the only way to get the agent to be better was through like manual conversation design. Like you're designing more flows, like and even today, this is still the way that most enterprises do it. You've got like a spreadsheet and it has intent, response. User says this, you say this. And you have a couple thousand rows of all your different like intent couplings and response couplings. And then you'll have a Visio flowchart that shows how it all ties together. That's how like traditional conversation design is done. The Visio is like your state graph. That's how the conversation flows. And then the like Excel is like what to say. And so Voiceflow like replaced all that. It was one, native product that had like, we're very focused on product design, like we're a very design driven company. And so like it's beautiful, it's easy to use, but it also like you can both design it, prototype it, launch it, scale it all in the same platform without having to use Excel and Visio. And then typically what would happen is the designers would throw it over to the engineers and then they would actually build the thing. Like that was the old workflow before Voiceflow. So like that's what led to, our Series A and like, starting to really scale into the enterprise and all that. And then LLMs, when that came out, it was a very clear, like, I remember that like it was yesterday, the day that ChatGPT came out. I was sitting in our San Francisco office and I started playing with it and I was like, that's it. Like manual conversation design's done. All of our revenue, all of our customers. Well, yeah, it doesn't go away overnight. Like I always joke to our team, the fax machine is still a multi-billion-dollar market. It's clear that the technology is cresting, right? Like traditional NLU intent-driven agents are going to move away, and it's going to move into like agentic frameworks and things like that. Now, at the time, we didn't really, when LLMs came out, we didn't know it was agentic frameworks because like 3.5, the first ChatGPT, didn't really know how to do that. It kind of came around with like 4.0 and others. But it was clear that LLMs are the future of at least response design. And then now we're getting into even the state design is agentic. And so, yeah, it's been a big transition. We focused on chat for a while, to be honest, because even though we started as Voiceflow and voice was our primary interface, we quickly learned that voice was just pretty rough back in like 2019, 2020, 2021. And so we wanted to build the best agents, not just like any agent. And so we actually focused on chat for a long time. And then only in the past like year and a half has voice gotten like really good and very quickly. And it's like a bunch of things coming together all at once. Improvements on the speech to text, improvement on the text to speech to speech models. Token streaming is like a huge unlock for latency. So you don't have to like batch the response. You can like stream the response in as it comes. Like all these things have come together to deliver like really human-like voice experiences. So yeah, it's been exciting to see like the original vision for the company kind of start to come to fruition after a bunch of detours, just given where the tech was at.
Absolutely. Just nerding out from a technical standpoint, explain the difference real quick again at a more deep level from batch processing to the streaming that you just were saying. Because I've heard of what batching is, but I hadn't heard about the new streaming.
So a stream is going to be, I'll explain batch first. Traditional models, how it's going to work is a user's utterance, which is essentially what they say, comes in. It first goes to a classification layer. So typically, traditionally that was like an NLU. And by the way, that was the new thing. When voiceovers really started getting off the ground, like NLU models are still all the rage. Now they're really being replaced. But that was like your classification layer. That would take what the user said and determine which intent is this. So an intent being kind of like a grouping of potential phrases that the NLU is trained on. And so it might be like, I need a refund. I have a refund please. Those are three what are called sample phrases. Those live inside of an intent that gets trained on the model. That's what helps the agent understand. Like the only AI and conversational AI pre-LLMs was that layer. Because then the response and then the actual conversation itself was all human written. And so, if people want an interesting framework to think about, there's kind of three components of an agent. There's the first, which is understanding what did the user say, like understand. Two is decide what to say next, like decide the action. And then the last is the actual response, like the production of the response. Those are the
Sure.
three components. Conversational AI historically, like pre-NLU, all three human written. Then NLU came onto the scene, and now the understanding layer was AI, right? So you could use AI to understand what the user said, but then it was still human written action, human written response. When LLMs first came out, they didn't immediately replace action. Instead, it was of the response. So it'd be AI, like NLU to understand what they said, followed by humans deciding what the flow is going to be, what state they're in, where to go next, what to do. And then an LLM would generate the response, like, hey, we're in this state. I'm going to generate, a welcome message or something like that. Agents are now all three of those things. We understand what the
Nice.
user says, we perform the action, and we produce the response. And so all three are now in the same layer, and they're all like LLM based. So that's kind of like that's the evolution. So that was batch processing. Batch processing, at the very end of it, the action, all of it gets produced at once. So what would happen is like the classification has to finish first, and then it sends it over. Like it's all in one big waterfall from like utterance comes in, you classify it, you send that to the state manager. The state manager decides what to do and say, and then it sends it back. Streaming, like token streaming, is as the model is listening to the user, like a speech to text model, it's producing tokens. The state manager, or in this case the agent, that's like computing it, like it's understanding that in real time and then producing response, right? So it's like kind of one continuous data stream. There are parts of that are still going to be batch in between. I'm trying to kind of keep it high level, but it's not as sequential as it used to be.
Kind of sounds like a person's thought process of hearing something and processing it as it's happening and then responding. It's kind of
Yeah.
creepy.
Yeah, it's like the old model would be like if you and I were having this podcast over voice notes, right?
Exactly.
Like
And the new
you got to
model's more.
record it, you send it over to me, I listen to it, I think what to say, send my response back. This is kind of like what modern voice AI is like, where we're just having a conversation in real time.
And what kind of things has that been able to unlock from a product standpoint for you?
I mean, the whole use case. We like, as a company, we don't ship junk, and like I'll give a great example. Like when GPT-5 came out, it was having a ton of like outages, because a lot of people are trying it out. They're just rolling out this model to production for the first time, and so people were like, add it into Voiceflow, add it into Voiceflow. And we looked at it and we're like, nah, not yet. Like, let's give it like a week to cook. And so we actually had it sitting in a feature flag. Like we basically, it's very easy to add a model. You add the model, and we just had it sitting there until we felt like it was ready, and then we add it. And so when it came to voice, we just weren't doing voices when it was old, kind of the old tech, because it wasn't good, right? Like, what's the point of Voiceflow, being this like way to build incredible AI customer experiences if the customer, the workflows may be easier to get there, but if the end customer experience is no better, we don't want to do that. And so with all the new voice AI tech, it's allowed us to like act like confidently say, okay, you can do phone calls with Voiceflow. You can do like web embeds for voice conversations. Like we're now confidently doing all this stuff because we believe it creates a great customer experience. So yeah, it didn't just unlock like a single use case. I think it unlocked really all use cases for us. And then if we get to like specific use cases, anything that's conversational, like a lot of traditional call centers, the agents, like the conversational AI, was not actually doing resolution of the conversation. It was actually just trying to route you to the right contact center queue. So like, let's say there's like a refunds queue and a support queue and maybe like a card activation queue if it's a bank. A lot of traditional IVRs, they can't actually do the tasks because it's too frustrating to do it over the phone. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't want to have to like press one and like it's too much. And so instead, the entire job of the agent was to get you into the right queue, because that allows for the queue agent to resolve your ticket faster because you're in a specific queue, a specific context. Maybe it gathers some information on that call tree to where you get there. But all the agent was meant to do was either to make it frustrating so that you leave the call and don't even need support. That's a real hidden incentive. Or B, we're trying to get as much context as possible so that by the time you get to the queue, the human agent is able to resolve things faster for you. Now, with conversational agents, because they're so conversational, they're low latency, they have access to tools, they can figure things out on their own. now you can actually resolve the whole query. So like that entire use case is a huge unlock.
That is a big one. Yeah. And it's funny, or not funny, but it's interesting. I took a little bit of a look at your customer stories before the call, and I recognized some of the names on there. I know there was Turo and StubHub were a couple of the different ones that were on there. And it's pretty intriguing kind of what you've been able to do for companies at different sizes and ones that you've kind of heard of. What is the primary customer size, as in how big is their company, so to speak, that you feel like you're working with right now?
So Voiceflow has a product-led growth motion. Um, so we don't hide behind like a contact sales button. I think in our space right now, I'd say there's sort of two different like philosophies. One is you don't care how the sausage gets made, you just care about the outcome, right? And so in that world, I'm going to have a landing page that has, beautiful case studies. Here's all the outcomes. Here's the ROI statements, contact sales. And that salesperson is going to spend all their time trying to learn your use case, trying to learn, what you're trying to do. And then when they build it, they're going to build it all for you. And typically, because you're buying an outcome, the pricing is going to be different. The pricing is going to be like based off outcome-based pricing, price per resolution. Like that's more the customer support specific example. And so in that world, what they're often doing is there's like a very lightweight product, maybe like a dashboard or like, some ability to tweak the prompts and things, but they're doing like forward deployed engineering to build the whole thing for you. And then they're charging you based off of a particular outcome. So that's not Voiceflow. We have a different philosophy, which is if you can't do it yourself, that's a product problem, right? Like instead of trying to say, hey, we'll just do everything for you and charge you based off outcome, our whole vision and like the thing we love doing is like helping customers build it themselves. And I think having been in this space for too long now, it's I feel like we went from being the new kid on the block to one of the OGs. I think the space is going to increasingly move to in-house teams because I saw this in the previous wave. With NLU, what happened was agencies made a ton of money. Forward deployed engineering made a ton of money. And then once the contact center agent, or like once the agent becomes seen as critical, it's similar to a mobile app. You often, like if it's a critical enough thing, you have a team that works on it. Now, maybe you're still using consultancies and implementation partners and things, but like once it's critical infra, big brands, especially who really care about customer experience, are going to have a team. They're going to have a product owner who's like, I own the agent experience. I've got, a small team of, developers, designers, AI folks, whatever it might be. And so I think in that world, those people want to make changes themselves to the customer experience. We've heard horror stories from the other side of the table where, they've built out a team because they think it's important. And in order for them to make a change, they have to submit a support ticket, which is funny because that support ticket goes to a human for their automated support bot so that that human can go in and make the change for them. I just don't think that's the future personally, but I can see right now when the space is so, hot and everyone's just trying to get something. If you don't have a prompt engineer, you don't have anyone who knows it, it's just easier to just buy a solution, do it all for me. But I don't think that's the long-term trend of the space.
Yeah, no, that's a good point because there are companies where they're hiding behind that book a sales call spot. And, it's pretty interesting to me how everyone's taking, or companies are taking different approaches. I want to kind of get down.
Really quick. I realized I didn't answer your question.
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah.
So I was explaining the two different models because I think it's actually really important context. Because we're self-serve and PLG, and we have services like, we work with enterprises. We do the fully deployed thing too, or the forward deployed.
Yeah, you have the enterprise button's got to have the contact sales though for everybody. Yeah. That's kind of uniform like SaaS thing. Yeah,
100%. So like we do that. Like we'll build and maintain agents for companies. Like I'd like to think we have the best of both worlds. Because if you want to build it yourself, great. It's way less, and you have like that full iteration experience. If he wants to build it for you, that's fine. We do that all the time. We love work doing it with customers. It gets built right, which is always really important. But because we have that PLG motion though, we've got companies of every possible size. Um, and it's actually kind of difficult for us to say we're only going to go for a very specific type of company. We often explain it as like fishing. Like if you're a sales led company, you're kind of spear fishing a little bit. Um, like we're going for tuna, right? We're going for companies that are 5,000 to 10,000 employees in, maybe like regional credit unions or like, whatever it might be. Like this is who our ICP is, and they spearfish. And they can do that very successfully because a lot of the pipeline generation, a lot of the brand awareness comes from targeted conferences, from targeted podcasts, and outbound sales, right? Where you're going after the same people. Voiceflow's like we're not spearfishing; we're throwing a net in the a net in the water to where we think the most tuna will be. So if we want that same ICP, that same customer profile, instead of like seeing it and throwing a spear, we're putting a net in the water and we catch whales, we catch tuna, we catch, sardines, like the whole thing. And so we've gotten, as big as government agencies, like national governments, all the way down to like, individual entrepreneurs who are just building, building an agent, as their first product. So we'd love to see more clustering, but it's kind of hard with the PLG motion. And then the other fun side is like we have a big community, over 10,000 developers in our Voiceflow Discord, and like those folks are going to be of every size. And I think that there's something cool because I think enterprises, it's not like they can't learn from someone who spent an entire weekend building a really amazing call flow, right? I think they can all kind of learn from each other regardless of the size. And if anything, the folks who aren't bound by as much internal, I don't want to say bureaucracy, it's almost a dirty word, but like internal process, they actually might benefit from seeing how folks who don't have that burden are able to move, to give inspiration for possible things they could do.
Yeah, fair point. Where do you think kind of you've seen some improvements, as you just mentioned, going from, or a little bit ago, going from the batch to the streaming flow there. Obviously, we've had model improvement after model improvement on the text side as well. Claude 3.5 Sonnet, 4.5 Sonnet about 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. Yep. Time flies. I don't know. GPT-5 Pro was just released technically yesterday or today. I forget. Yep. And, it's just going to continue to improve. So where do you think the improvements, especially on the voice side, are going to come? Is it just like quicker responses, more realism, or is there something else that we might be missing?
Yeah, it's likely the joining of TTS and STT. So speech-to-speech models are doing this, right? Like the current stack for most voice AI companies is you have a speech-to-text model that turns your speech into text. You then process that with an LLM, and then it sends that to a text-to-speech model that turns that back into speech. And you do that as fast as possible with token streaming, and you're trying to remove any latency in between the components to provide the sort of the fastest, most fluid experience. There's no speech-to-speech models where there is no conversion into text. It is speech in, process speech, and then a speech out. And so I think OpenAI's real-time API is aspirationally in that direction, at least from what I've seen today. Like there's a couple of simple tests I've done to see how connected are the two. And I think one thing that was interesting with the real time, so I'm going to talk about two different models. So I think one is true speech to speech. I think the other is a much tighter orchestration, kind of being branded in that speech to text, or speech to speech model. So with the real time API from OpenAI, if you ask it to detect your sentiment, it can't. Now, so for example, you say, hey, match my sentiment, and you speak really quiet, or you speak really angry, like whatever it might be, it's not going to match you on the other side. So that's sort of one thought. And the other thought is there's still options to select which speech to text model you want, which in a true speech to speech, you wouldn't have that. Like it would all be just one model. And so I think that what it suggests to me is they're still doing an orchestrated approach. It's not true sort of speech to speech, at least not today, right? At least not what we've seen on the API in the playground. The advanced voice mode might be different because it is incredible. That is like one of the most incredible products I've ever used is the ChatGPT advanced voice mode. That might be different. It actually feels very different. But at least what we have on the API today is not that. And so that brings us to Google, and they have, I forget the name of the model. I think it might be Gemini Flash 2.5 or something like that.
Yeah, 2.5, yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to pull up the exact name. I just want to make sure I get the right one. But that one passes those two tests that I just talked about, whereas OpenAI doesn't in terms of like whether it's a true speech-to-speech model. If you speak in a whispering tone and ask it, it knows, and it's able to match that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's quite neat. It's blazingly fast. Yeah, it's able to detect things that only a true kind of speech to speech model could do. You could probably do this on an orchestrated side, but it'd be a lot of like work to do that versus a speech to speech model should be quite native. Now, the downside is we found it's very bad at tool calling. And I think it's likely because there's been so much work on tool calling that in order to make a true like voice agent model, you still need to rely on the tool calling abilities of the LLM. So this might be to OpenAI's credit. Yeah, it's not speech to speech, but it's way better. Like for most, you know what I mean? Like for most actual developers, you don't even need speech to speech. It's already so fast on its own. It's already an incredibly expressive TTS. There's stuff you can do to conjoin them really tightly, but then you still get the benefits of an LLM that's really good at tool calling. So like, for example, if I was to give, if my goal was to give an incredible demo, it's going to wow an executive, I'm going to use Google. If I'm going to do a production application, I'm going to use real-time API from OpenAI. Like, though, that's kind of the difference. It's like the speech-to-speech is incredible from like a conversational standpoint, incredibly fluid, but it's not capable yet, at least from what we've been able to evaluate. So that's kind of I think that's where voice AI is going to go, though. I do think that's the future. Like speech-to-speech is the future. I just think the tool calling's not very good today.
Yeah, that's fair, and that's I think a good follow-up question will probably be like, when do you think maybe the capabilities at mass for that tool calling will be improved significantly?
I don't know. It's tough to say, and yeah, it's really tough to say. And I think the other question that's worth asking is, do we even need speech to speech? Like, I think today, from what I've seen, it's the future. But there's also a point at which your voice experience is so fast, like the latency is so low, that having that flexibility of being able to do orchestration in the middle, like to go do other things, to have deterministic responses that are not like scripted responses that are not, or I think people are calling it directed dialogue now. It's like kind of changing the name. There's a point at which do you even need a speech-to-speech model? And I think that's another valid question. Like an OpenAI may have come to that realization. So my gut tells me that speech-to-speech is the future of the space, but I also might be wrong in that you just don't even need it because like an orchestrated approach has gotten so fast. Like DeepGram launched a model yesterday. It kind of got overshadowed by, or actually I think it launched on Friday, but it's kind of been overshadowed by OpenAI's Dev Day, which I'm sure we'll chat about. And it's blazing fast. It's really, really good. And what they've done is they've incorporated more elements of like, it's not just doing speech to text. It's essentially more natively working with some of the dialogue without getting too technical. Like it's optimized for conversation and it performs way better than the other models we've seen from them when it comes to actual like dialogue driven voice agents. So who knows? It's open question as to when it'll get better, and another open question as to whether we'll need it if it does get better.
I think it's a fair and humble response to be like, it's hard to say, because a lot of this stuff kind of comes out of nowhere. I know for me today, I just mentioned about, or you as well just mentioned about the ChatGPT improvements, like the agent builder that just came out today. Their SDK was just released too, right? Or their agent SDK, I should say.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like
and same with Claude the other week.
Yeah, we've got a good relationship with the folks at OpenAI and Anthropic, and we sort of knew that they were building Agent Kit ahead of time, like sort of a couple months before, we were under NDA. Now it's public. I can kind of talk about it, but we knew they were building it. And I think it leads to this really interesting idea of the commoditization and bundling of agent builders inside of products. So maybe if I kind of go back 2 years ago, when agents are really starting to get off the ground, still small but starting to get off the ground, you had a lot of like agent building products. Voiceflow was in that bucket where the core product was an agent builder, right? Like that was the goal, was to orchestrate. At one point it was prompt chaining, and then you get into agent chaining. And I think what's happening is as the models plateau, at least in terms of like their exponential like intelligence curve, and even if they are getting better at a rapid rate, you also get to the question of, do you need like a super PhD level intelligence for some of these questions, or like is a bachelor's degree level of intelligence fine? You know what I mean? Like for some customer support queries, you just don't need a super PhD. And so, for a lot of use cases, it's going to be, pretty comparable. So in that world, if the models aren't advancing crazy fast anymore, and even if they are, do you need it? You kind of get into a weird spot as a model provider around lock-in. Like, how do you ensure people continue to use your models, right? Because these are not like recurring, at the enterprise side, you're doing recurring contracts and things, but like for a lot of folks, it's just purely based off the API. And it's so easy to switch. Like customers in Voiceflow, we have a model garden. People switch constantly from Anthropic to OpenAI to, Meta to like whatever it might be. They're just constantly switching different models. So how do you create lock-in, right? And I think that's where OpenAI really intelligently is like verticalizing, right? They're adding layers that they're going into the app layer to ensure usage of the compute layer. Because I think unlike in the cloud, where I think at first people were thinking about OpenAI and Anthropic like AWS or GCP. But I think the difference is, to move your cloud is so hard. It's so much work to do it. Like relative to an API call to an AI model, that like there was a little bit more lock-in, and then they did continue to build in the apps on top of the cloud, right? And so everything did start to kind of bundle up. I think OpenAI is just doing the same thing. They're running that same playbook where they're bundling things in, but I think they're doing it at even faster haste because, unlike the cloud where it's a little bit more friction to move, from AWS to GCP, it's like 2 minutes to switch from OpenAI to Anthropic. So they have to go up into that layer. So with that, I think agent builders are becoming essentially a feature of a product, versus I think before they were standalone products. And I think that's like the trend in the space. So like 11 Labs is a great example. They added their agent builder. It's a way for them to drive more lock-in towards the TTS voices, towards like their 11 Labs stack, because that's kind of their core business. And then they're layering on this like top of funnel of like, hey, don't go use another vendor that has a multitude of TTS voices. We'll just give it to you for free, or for a nominal fee, just cover hosting, whatever it might be, cover development, and we're going to lock you into our stack. So I think that's what's happening is agent builders are becoming bundled into larger products.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair point, because I've been wondering the same thing, and it kind of goes back to a conversation that we had on our pre-screen as well, which I find fascinating that you brought up to me, which is about, I guess we could call it a bubble. I think it was the term you might have used. There's kind of an interesting position a lot of people are in regards to funding and where we sit in the value attribution to companies right now. I believe you made the point that Anthropic, for example, or OpenAI is the foundational crutch of a lot of these tools, right? Or Gemini, where they're without that model, right? They wouldn't really have a product. Now they're able to take the models and utilize it to the best of their effect with very specific use cases and setups. But it's kind of like this double attribution of value towards the model, right? Because Anthropic's getting funding, OpenAI is getting all that Microsoft money, And then the companies that are utilizing those models to the best effect are kind of getting the funding again in an
Yeah.
interesting way. Well, could you speak a little bit more to that and your thought on the industry as a whole due to that?
Yeah. It's funny. Like when people, I've seen so much like we're in a bubble talk. Um, and it's funny. I think even in our pre-screen call, I talked about like, I'm a big shareholder in AMD, these big
Yeah,
relative
fair
to
enough.
my portfolio. And
Yeah,
that did really well yesterday, right? With OpenAI announcing a big compute, I think it popped like 30% or something.
30%
Um,
is crazy.
yeah,
Dang it! I'm a big Nvidia guy. I've been on the Nvidia. I thought I was cool for that. Now there's another one I should have jumped on. Dang it!
yeah, I think all the semis, I think Intel is actually the biggest winner. I think they're up like 80% or something. But
Good for
um,
them.
and yeah, no, it's great. I think the US um, needs to have more. There's a whole chat on like national security and
Yeah,
like having
yeah,
semis.
yeah, yeah.
That's a whole different thing. But yeah, it's great that the semis are doing well. I think so. When people talk about a bubble, like I'm so in this space, and I don't know about you, but like I don't use Google search anymore. I really don't. I actually use Google search
Yeah.
only out of convenience that I use Chrome as my primary browser, and it's right there. But I'm never searching. I'm actually just like I'm just going. It's literally just my portal to the internet. Like it may as well just be a CLI. And I think when you look at like my consumption of Claude, like when I kind of look at my consumption of everything personally, and then I look at um, the ramp of Voiceflow and like our customers and what they're doing, the success they're seeing, I don't think it's like a bubble in how a lot of people would define bubbles. So I think every bubble is kind of different, and like a bubble being defined as like overstretched valuations. So I think back in like the three tech cycles that most people talk about are going to be like the dot-com crash, where the internet was this brand new thing and the valuations got crazy. And I think it's because like people didn't understand the business model yet. If you remember, there's this classic like everyone's focused on like eyeballs, right? Like eyeballs, eyeballs,
Sure.
eyeballs. That was all that mattered on like the .com era. And then there was this like mismatch between the expectation that eyeballs meant revenue, customers, like it just never converted to revenue, and so it ends up that bubble pops. So I think that was like the bubble was really the misunderstanding of tech business models. Like SaaS didn't exist. Like a lot of these things just didn't exist. So then we get into 2021. So not even that long ago at this point, which is crazy to say out loud. I think that was the revenue was real, the growth was insane, but it was a misunderstanding of the growth pull forward that the pandemic caused, where all these like we saw this at Voiceflow, our revenue accelerated like crazy because suddenly all these companies, like everyone's working from home, the stimulus is pumped into the economy, like people, like everything just went on overdrive, and there was this whole concept of like the new normal. And that was like the phrase that kept getting thrown around, which is funny because that was not the new normal, right? We actually went back to the median, back to trend. It was just a pull forward of demand for folks sort of adopting digital services because they had to, right? They're all working from home, and that like really sort of funneled through the rest of the tech space. And so that bubble. Like it was real revenue, real demand, but it was a pull forward in demand, and we were expecting that to last for longer than it did, right? Where we're currently in, I think, is to kind of what you alluded to is like value misattribution, um, because companies that are quoted as AI native are raising at really high multiples right now, which is funny because I would actually, if I was a VC, I would flip it. If you're AI native, you might have really fast growth, but it's so hard to pick apart your value from the value of the underlying model, and ultimately, that's what reflects in margin. And so you've seen a lot of companies like companies in AI space where insane growth, insane. But then you're seeing Cursor's a good example, having to change their pricing on their community to try. How do you figure out how to get margin in there? Because if your value is so coupled with a model, it can be difficult to layer on your own margin on top. And so you've seen companies have negative margins, like unit margins, right? or maybe not unit, but like customer, sort of specific customer margins. Like I think that's really challenging, and I think that's where the misattribution is coming in. Because if a company raises $100 million, and they then go and spend that 100 million on Anthropic, and then Anthropic gets a multiple, and that company gets a high multiple. They both have real growth. Anthropic just added 100 million in ARR. They just added 100 million essentially as a reseller of Anthropic tokens with some value added features on top. Like I think that's actually where the like quote unquote bubble is this like inability to segment. Like we've always just assumed tech has like 70 to 80% margins, right? And I just don't think that's true anymore with a lot of AI native companies. And so, yeah, I think this can be solved, but I do think that's where some of like the overvaluedness comes from. The companies that I think are going to be the strongest right now are those who actually were existing companies that layered on AI, and their value is very clear. Like it was already very clear before. Like if HubSpot, it's a CRM company, they add in, an Ask AI, they add in, customer support, powered by AI, like whatever it might be. Like I feel like the value was already clear, and they're layering in these awesome features for customers. Versus if your value is so deeply tied to the model itself, and if the model went away, you went away, that gets really hard.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I know some companies that are kind of in that margin range, but I don't actually think it's as common as one would expect nowadays. It's like some, right? And previously, because it was maybe the company that, or most of these companies were providing their entirety of their value. Not saying, well, do you think it's a fair way to put it? Like,
well, it's murky. That's the challenge.
Yeah, so, that's why it's confused. Yeah.
And like what is the value of, it's kind of like the whole like wrapper thing. We went into a phase of like don't fund wrappers, and then the wrappers had incredibly fast growth because AI is valuable, right? Like there's no bubble when it comes to the value that customers get from AI, and the businesses, all that good stuff. And so because of the value, the growth is real. I think the question becomes, how do you price the thing so that your like distinct wrapper value, like, wrappers used honestly too thinly, like everyone's a wrapper to some degree, you could kind of go all the way down the stack until you get to the person like, mining the silicon, right? Like the wrapper is just a way to define a value chain. And
that's fair. Actually, I hadn't considered that. That's kind of true.
Yeah. You can kind of go all the way down, right? Like, so anyways, like it's kind of like how thick your wrapper is. I think the problem is people are just not, like, pricing models haven't evolved yet, in my opinion, to the place they need to be where you are clearly segmenting your own value. And yeah, you might be entirely powered by AI, but people can very clearly say, like, if you had to ask a customer, say, hey, if the customer knows what your value is on top of the model, I think you've probably achieved something. But that's obviously tough to do. But I think that's probably the place that you need to get to have like some sort of stable margin and pricing. Even the way you value companies, like how much of this is model revenue and how much of this is like your value added revenue. Because in the past, like our AWS bill does not rise exponentially, right? Like it's so marginal relative to revenue, versus LLM costs are very real variable costs that scale with your revenue. Yeah.
It's directly correlative for the most part, it seems like. That's something that I am wondering about too, because these models are, as we're kind of discussing, maybe from a valuation standpoint, company to company. You have Anthropic, which if you guys haven't looked into how Claude Code is just a hilarious cash pile burning situation with Anthropic right now, until they change, I think, their pricing soon, which they claim they will. But there are guys like doing continuous Claude Code with sub agents, basically on a $200 a month plan, doing like $30,000 a month in coding costs. And that tells you very plainly the value they're providing over the costs for themselves is significant. And so they're losing money practically. And then the companies that are getting funded that are, quote, wrappers, sort of, might be even in the same situation that have margin issues. Do you think these companies at some point will just say, and when they have that buy-in that you were talking about earlier, that stickiness, where they're going to be required, that they will adjust their pricing models.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of financial engineering over the next 2 years. Because like, the goal of every company is to create more shareholder value, right? The meme.
Mm-hmm. That is it.
And
Stonks.
how do you create shareholder value? Because not all revenue is created equal, right? Your margin matters, sure. But then also your repeatability matters, like your stickiness, because ultimately like a company gets valued off of its future cash flows. And so the more predictable your revenue is, the more valuable your company is. That's why SaaS companies get valued more than, maybe a consumer tech, a consumer platform, growth, revenue, all that stuff valued equally. Enterprise SaaS is going to get the highest multiple because it's the most predictable, it's the most sticky. And so it's the easiest to understand compounding revenues over time. And so I think you'll probably see, everything's kind of pay as you go today. But I think you'll start to see more creative, like resurgence of SaaS to try to get some of that repeatability back in. So we do a little bit of this at Voiceflow where we might take a actual hit on absolute revenue, but for the sake of a plan. So Voiceflow runs off what we use as credits. It's essentially our like currency that you can spend on whatever compute you want, right? Like text to speech, hosting, like whatever it is, it's your credits. You can buy those credits at a sort of like rack rate, or if you want to commit to a plan, we're actually going to give you a big discount on those, right? So we're actually taking less revenue, but we're getting the repeatability, which actually is more valuable. And so like there's going to be a lot of financial engineering, I think, like that, like the Claude, Pro plan. I wouldn't be surprised if, you get your feature plan and then you get your like compute plan on top, and that has overages tied in. Like all this stuff's going to be engineered in a way to maximize the best, highest quality revenue you can. But I think right now everyone's just so focused on growth and distribution, which is like the right thing to do. But I do think you'll see a lot of like pricing models and things change to adopt.
Okay. Yeah, that's a fair. Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of fun speculating on this type of stuff. And the main one that I've kind of asked people over the last little while, last question to close things out, would be, where do you think the job market is going to be impacted in the next like 2 to 5 years from this agentic boom?
Yeah, I think the entertainment industry is going to get way bigger. Like,
Really?
yeah. So like at the most basic level of jobs is like sustenance farming. Like you know what I mean? Or like nomadic folks like hunting and gathering, like that's their job. And the goal of the job is to feed yourself and your family. Like, and then what's happened was as technology has increased, right? Better irrigation methods, all this kind of stuff. That's allowed us to have essentially all that matters is the ability to produce more with less, right? So instead of like every family used to have to do their own sustenance farming to just feed themselves, now instead one family can feed 2 families, and that allows for the other family to specialize. Now maybe they're going to be the one building the tools. And so like that's the sort of how technology allows for further output per unit, like that just enables humans to do more things. So when we look all the way through history, that's kind of been the case. Like you and I sitting here on a podcast, like,
sure.
I don't know if you're full time, but if you were full time, that just like is unthinkable. Like, 100 to 200 years ago, like influencers, like the pro athletes are getting paid more than ever, right? Like look at the salary caps of the NFL. It's unbelievable
Oh
how
yeah.
they've grown. Like Patrick Mahomes' $500 million deal. Like go ask a pro athlete 100 years ago, inflation adjusted, like how insane that would be.
No, you're very right. I was just watching the America's team documentary that's on Netflix. And I think Troy Aikman's deal in the 90s, I want to say he was paid a record-setting 11.2 million 6-year rookie contract, and a 50 million 8-year contract extension. Let's say 50 divided by 8. Let's say he's getting like 63 over 10 at the time, right? Adjusted for inflation, what's 63 million USD in 1995 would have been 133 million today, right? Which means that adjusted for inflation, Mahomes' contract versus Troy Aikman's was 5x.
Yeah.
Which is wild. Yeah.
And so I think what's causing that is the surplus value has to go somewhere, right?
I think it was entertainment.
Yeah, it's going to go to entertainment. It's going to go to just buying more things. And I think as people have, the 5-day work week is an invention. It wasn't always this way, right? Like that was Ford Motors. I believe it was Ford, where
you're right. It was Ford.
Yeah. They quote unquote invented the 5-day work week, right? In 2021, there were chats about a 4-day work week. And so as people get more time back, what are people going to spend their time on? They're going to spend their time on entertainment. And so that's kind of the first point on like, where is the surplus value going to go? But then, people still have to have jobs, right? This is where people have found their way, like that surplus value has to be spent on something. And so I think that more jobs are going to be created, particularly around entertainment, services, travel, leisure, all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, there'll be like lots of new like sort of white collar, blue collar jobs as well. We just don't know what they are yet, right? Like it's hard to predict the future. Prompt engineer is a real title now. That was not a title a couple of years ago. Things constantly evolve and we constantly find ways for humans to do work. And so I'm just like, I'm an eternal optimist that like humans don't want to sit around all day and do nothing. Like they do want to have something that they're passionate about or fulfillment about. And ideally, you find a job that fills that need. And if not, you need a way to make money. Like someone's going to have a job that, they're building their dream, they're building a company, they'll have a job for you. Right. And so, yeah, that's what I would hope maybe it's not a dream if it's like an IBM executive or something, but they have a job for you regardless. They'll have some work to do. So yeah, I think those two factors, like the demand and the supply, I think the supply of jobs will be there because the demand is only going to grow. And like, it's not like this value gets destroyed, right? Like that value is going to go somewhere and people are gonna have jobs to do it. So, maybe it's all of us working for Patrick Mahomes one day, but that's still a job.
Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. Definitely going to happen. As a Chiefs fan, I wouldn't mind working for Patrick Mahomes, but sorry if you're not. I feel like Patrick Mahomes was working for the defense last night. Anyways, so we appreciate having you on the show. It was a really, really fun chat. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close this episode out?
If you are looking to automate customer support, contact center, outbound calling, inbound calling, chat, whatever it might be, reach out to us, voiceflow.com. I had to do a plug. We're talking about the invention of the 5-day work week. We got kind of off topic. Use Voiceflow. That's it. That's my plug.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time, and I hope that everyone will go check out Voiceflow. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Thanks.